All right, welcome back, everybody. We're going to get started with our next presenter here. We want to welcome Art Harman. He's going to talk about human Mars flyby, still the starting gate for Mars.
Well, thanks so much. And I'm glad you all are here. The Mars Flyby, you all may be familiar with. I've presented on this in the past. But let me tell you how I got involved. 5 years ago, I was working in Congress, and I was called to a meeting with the first private scientist astronaut, Dennis Tito. Dennis had a proposal for an entirely privately funded Mars flyby expedition. And so I was called to this meeting along with my boss. The committee chairman and subcommittee chairman were there, and just a few other interested members. But I'll never forget my instant reaction when I heard what the flyby was all about. Dennis Tito named the Mars flyby Inspiration Mars, and for good reason. But it took me about 1 second to see how that would change everything. Many people have lost faith with our space program, and that was especially true 5 years ago at this time. Shuttles got canceled, plans to go to the moon and Mars got canceled, the big rocket, things like that. I do a lot of radio shows, and one bit of feedback I get is things like, well, what's America doing now that the space program's been canceled? It's like, oh my God, well, look up. We got astronauts 200 miles up that are doing great things. And we're preparing to send commercial astronauts and NASA astronauts on commercial crew. And we've got rovers running around Mars and so many other things. So the space program does exist, but we're losing faith a bit because what's new? What's bold? What's NASA talking about that's different and doing in particular? So when I got the briefing on the Mars flyby, it was like in an instant, I saw 1 billion children around the world looking and saying, oh my God, we've got people going to Mars, adults too. I saw how it would revitalize the space program, people's interest in it. And with that comes a certain 535 people's interest, and that's Congress, because if Congress thinks something is really going to produce votes and that the people want, they're going to put more money and support into it. They'll support private-public partnerships more. They'll support sending humans to Mars in far greater ways than they are now. So instantly, I, as the space advisor to my then boss in Congress and his legislative director, I went into action. I did what I could do. I wrote a bill to allow all sorts of cooperation with this private venture, to allow NASA to share all sorts of information, to do things that otherwise they wouldn't necessarily have been able to do. And then when Dennis Tito ran into problems raising money, he was going to put up basically about $1/3 of $1 billion himself. But he tried to find other people to do the same, and he was not able to. It might be different now, I don't know, but at the time he was not able to find it. So we then worked to make this more of a NASA program with a lot of commercial space involvement. And so one of the things I did was I tried to get language adopted to transfer funding from the asteroid redirect program, which a lot of people were not thrilled about, to Inspiration Mars, to the Mars flyby. So those are some of the things that I could do. Now, as time went on, the original date was going to be this year. It would have launched in January. Now, when you think about it, 2013 to 2018, well, we didn't spend a lot more time going from President Kennedy's speech in 1961 to go to the moon in this decade than we did, it took us 8 years. From there, from absolute scratch, we didn't know how to go to the moon. We didn't have the materials or the know-how or anything. And yet in 8 years, we had that giant leap. Now, the moon was never supposed to be and planned to be a one-shot Cold War, plant the flag, grab some rocks thing. It was intended to go on continually. It was intended to be, the opening of spacefaring society. Werner von Braun in 1960s, he proposed the first flybys. By the way, that's one of the trajectories for a 2021 Mars-Venus flyby. Because after 2018 became unreasonable, we then looked at, well, what would the next date be? Oh, wait, that's got a BOGO, buy one, get one offer. We'll throw in Venus as well, and so that would have included that exciting journey in all of 580 some days. What happened in that? Well, instead of this, and by the way, there's a 1966 Mars Flyby spacecraft. You can see a spacecraft inside it and payloads to drop along the way. But what happened? The bureaucrats got in there, the bean counters, and everybody who thought that they had a better use for NASA's money than NASA did. And so instead of going on to building a base on the moon, and that might have turned into a colony or a mini city today, and then going on to Mars, and today having a base or a little colony on Mars, we didn't. We got that guy instead. The Mars Flyby is the Apollo 8 for Mars. Even in the previous administration, after canceling the return to the moon and specific plans to actually land humans on Mars, they did put in their directive to do a Mars flyby. But wait a minute, their flyby was going to be in the mid-2030s. We can, if we dedicate ourselves to it, through NASA, through SpaceX, through Blue Origin and others, have boots on the ground on Mars in the 2030s. That means we should be doing the flyby, which is the Apollo 8, validating the journey, the life support, and 1,000 other things. We can be doing that in the 2020s instead. And that'll then force us to do bigger and greater things in the 2030s, like setting foot on Mars. What would, so we want to yank that from the 2030s to the 2020s. 2024, 2026 might at this point be a reasonable date for a flyby if we can get the funds, private individuals doing a SpaceX, or get NASA to do it instead of some of the things that they do that maybe they shouldn't be doing. What would a Mars flyby look like design-wise? Well, this was some of the architecture for the 2018 planned flyby, and the team had looked at both SpaceX, other vendors, Orion, SLS. At the time, they decided that a single launch of using SLS would be better than a multiple launches with rendezvous and so forth. We may differ, or some may differ on those, but that's what they determined. They were then going to use a Cygnus as the transit habitat, a lengthened Cygnus. And now today we've got sort of a wider variety of options: Falcon Heavy, New Glenn, Dragon, Starlifter, Starliner, and so forth. But their goal was to put together a 501-day journey that would and that only happens every 15 years. It's quicker. But unfortunately, that also means that the capsule will return at a much higher velocity. And so one of the elements that made that difficult, besides the money, was you need a better heat shield. However, there are slower flybys in the 700 and some day range that could be easily done at every launch date. And we should be doing those. NASA should be talking about that now. Get kids excited. Hey, we're sending people to Mars. They're going to look down from 100 miles up at Mars and show us what a Mars journey is going to be like. Possibly the toughest part of technologically is, from people I know, is the life support. We've got, on the space station, we've got yesterday's coffee is today's coffee, as they call it. But that's not been really perfected and improved a whole lot since it was built. The highest and best purpose of ISS, in my mind, is to be able to simulate all the conditions for long duration space flight. That means you've got to get, life support, air, everything that's capable of, 700-800 day journeys. And we're not there yet. In 5 years, I'm told with sufficient funding, we could be. But ISS has been up there for 18 years, and we haven't used it as that vehicle to perfect that. We should, especially since they're talking about either privatizing or crashing it in 2025 or thereabouts. I have a few remarks in one of my speeches tomorrow on that. Now, the design is essentially simple for a flyby. You've got a capsule, you've got a rocket, you've got a habitat, and so forth. But one thing I'd like to call attention to is, who's the Mars Society? It's made up of us. And all of the talents and all the creativity of our members. Well, the Mars Society has had a few flyby design competitions. Is there anybody who participated in any of those? Well, they were, they did excellent jobs, and, again, the society's made up of the actions and the vision of its members, and so the participation of those who did enter in the competitions should be greatly applauded. And those people may go on to be working for SpaceX and NASA and others and actually put together the flyby that will happen sometime in the 2030s or hopefully much sooner. Here's an issue that should concern all of us, and that is there's 6 launch windows before 2033. Now, to us in this room and to many watching on YouTube, 2033 is often referred to as sort of the ideal time and date. It's like a deadline. Let's land on Mars by 2033. So if you've ever built anything, you've ever done anything complicated, you start with your end goal and you work back. Well, if you're going to be on Mars in 2033, you've got a lot of work to do. And there's only 6 launch windows in advance of it. Are we going to waste them? Are we going to invest them? Or just leave them unused? We've not used a number of Mars launch windows. There are 2 that disturb me a bit. One was the Maven and the other's Insight. Those are lovely science projects, but they have absolutely nothing at all to do with getting humans to Mars. You can do what they did after we've got boots on the ground and are building a colony on Mars. but those consumed the resources and money and launch cycles that could have been used to put a water, mining and filtration system, methane processing demonstration units, a demonstration habitat on Mars, and so forth. Those are, insights on its way and so forth now. But what do we got? We got 2020. We're going to have a Mars rover, the follow-on to Curiosity 2. That's going to collect samples of the Martian soil, but it's just going to put them down on Mars and leave them. There's absolutely no plans, concrete plans to ever bring them back. They're talking about it. I kept bugging people at NASA for a long time, and at least they're talking about it now. But that's one of the precursors for landing humans on Mars, in my opinion. You want to find out what really is in the soil. Are there more toxins besides perchlorates? Those alone are going to be a challenge to deal with. Is there hints or signs of life? When we get back a kilogram or so of Mars soil, we can put under electron microscopes and do a lot more than Curiosity can ever do to find if there's any signs of life. And so the launch windows should not be wasted if we're ever going to get to Mars. We need to start using them. Now SpaceX has said, in 2022 we're going to have an unmanned mission, in 2024 a crewed mission to Mars. I don't think BFR is going to be ready then. Kudos to them if it is. I'm sure NASA will be working with them, and that may accelerate things. If BFR isn't on the pad, then it may be flying NASA and other astronauts in the 2030s. If the flyby occurred, say, in 2026, this would be good. It would get back in 2029. And that would further accelerate things happening to go to Mars. It would excite the public. What's NASA talking about now? And I'm going to talk about it tomorrow, the LOP-G. Don't you love NASA acronyms? To orbit around the moon, but not go to the moon. And so if we have, and that's going to, after an initial bit of excitement, oh boy, we're going to the moon. Oh wait, we're not. Okay, they're going to stand up there, and they've got a Nintendo controller they're going to control some robots on the moon with. So we've got to up the game if we want to keep public interest and thus support and funding for getting to Mars. Beyond that, we've got to be landing on Mars demonstration habitats, equipment to process water and methane, and test those out. And in 2031, if we're going to have boots on the ground, in 2033, then we want to have the habitats they'll live on, or at least backup units on Mars in 2031. So we should be building those many years in advance. And NASA has no plans to do that yet. They do have a directive, and I'll be talking about the president's space policy and some of the changes happening and in store tomorrow in one of my talks, and that may hearken better conditions for our goals of going to Mars. So, and all of these steps here, they don't have to be NASA. Obviously, if SpaceX is going to do a crewed mission, this is excellent, and uncrewed missions. We do have a car in space. And this is a good first step. Sometimes things work in ways we don't necessarily expect. So Elon Musk is launching a rocket to test, a Falcon Heavy. He kind of shot himself in the foot by saying this thing's most likely going to blow up. So he couldn't find anyone, even Planetary Society wanted to put any instruments on it, even though it's going way out there and it might be useful, because they figure they're going to put millions of dollars worth of stuff on his rocket and it's going to go up in smoke on the pads. So instead he launched his car, but this was brilliant. Now it may sell some Teslas, but when you looked at the memes going around on Facebook and so forth, what did you see? Kids, people loved the concept. Oh my God, there's a car in space. There's a guy in it. He's leaning out the window. And it humanized it, and in ways that NASA hasn't done, nobody's really done. And so who knows? There may be people kids that as soon as they get into college, they're going to go and beat down the doors for STEM courses and say, that car motivated me when I was 10 years old, and I want to do that. I want to be the guy. And so sometimes little things like that mean a lot because it excites people. And that's what the Mars Flyby will do. It will excite people. It will drive us forwards, and it will give us the approach to the day in which somebody sets a footstep on the dusty red surface of Mars. So you can follow, information about my work on the flyby and other issues at my organization's website, Coalition to Save Manned Space Exploration, SaveMannedSpace.com. And of course, it's Save Manned Space on Twitter and Facebook. And you can always contact me as well, info@SaveMannedSpace. Happy to take questions, and I appreciate your interest. Yes?
Question, I'll bring the mic down.
My talk tomorrow is about using robotics first, because my fear is if you do a flyby or if anything goes wrong, which inevitably something will, because the more complex the system, the more things can go wrong, that it will set back space exploration for decades. So I think it would be better to use robots first.
Well, you've got an excellent point. Now, we've sent many payload to Mars. We know how to do that. And we've, of course, had people continually on the space station, which is people in space, in sealed up tin cans for 18 years and more. So I think we're ready for a Mars flyby now. Obviously we'll be putting more and more robots on Mars. One thing that can be done with one of the launch windows is you send like a swarm of little Mars drones and little Mars rovers to every likely and desirable landing site for the first landing on Mars. And of course, all that's in advance of the people. Thanks. Next question?
Next question, anybody?
Red shirt.
Yes, in the flyby, is it even conceivable that, there's a worst case emergency scenario? Is there any plan that in the flyby, all of the equipment, including a lander, would be included so that there could be an emergency landing? Now, the question is, how do they, they're alive, but they're stuck on Mars, and how would you rest them? What's the risk assessment for, how does that work into the overall?
Well, for flyby, you can't do that. For an orbit, you in theory could, sure. Because a flyby doesn't have the fuel or capability to go into orbit. It's just on a big loop that, just like, say, with Apollo 8, it's just going to follow it like a roller coaster on a track, and it's going to come back to Earth and Earth orbit. So that's not viable. Now, there has been plenty of discussion about is like a second mission being Martian orbit only. I'm not sure if that would be a big advance, but of doing that. Even then, if you're going to then have a lander and everything, why not use it and just make it into a real landing? Thanks. Next question?
Any other questions from Art? Excuse me a second.
Given the limited opportunity due to launch windows and financing, et cetera, wouldn't it be more prudent to do that first flyby or orbital mission and then come back without landing, but with the lander attached, much like they did with the Apollo when they took the lander around the moon but they didn't land on number 10? I mean, these are expensive, long duration missions, and is there really going to be time to do both? And yet you would want to take the lander there, I would think, once anyhow.
Yeah, and we did do that with the moon. It's kind of a cost and weight and so forth and complexity issue. If you're going to do that, that's going to require more launching of stuff and more complexity. The goal with the flyby was to keep it simple. 2 people, habitat, rocket, and so forth. And you just do that as a pretty simple thing. Keeps the cost down, which means it can be done sooner and with a lot less expense. That we obviously need a lander, and I hope there's people working on Mars landers that are of that size. Biggest thing we've landed so far is Curiosity, and that itself was an interesting feat, as we see with all of its complicated things. It hovers and then it lowers it and so forth. We'll see that repeated in 2020 with the next rover. Next question?
So recently I was recounting the entire moon program to a young friend who didn't realize we had a Gemini program. And in Gemini, we went and developed all of these techniques and the abilities. There was one concept: we could have sent Gemini out to the moon and back. That would have been a true flyby, no chance to land or anything like that. But I think in trying to get to Mars, as we all desperately want to do, we're leaving out that middle step. This is a huge part of it, but what about even something inbounds from that? What about a mission that was in a huge Earth orbit, maybe a 2-week period, fly out to the Lagrange points, check out Trojan asteroids ahead or behind the Earth, but have the opportunity to come back to Earth in 2 weeks instead of the long-term danger?
You're absolutely right. And when you look at say the plans for Orion missions, those would be exactly that. I think the first one would simply go out to beyond the moon and back, and then follow on ones doing other things like that. So yeah, it's a gradient steps. You don't all of a sudden launch a flyby. You want to do shakedown cruises and so forth to for a few weeks, then try maybe a little longer, put a habitat on it, and go out for a month or 2. There was a proposal by Lockheed Martin in one of the early Orion launches to do a mission to Hubble, to refurbish Hubble for another decade. All these things are quite possible. And those will be following on in the early 2020s. Any other questions, Mars?
Any other
Flyby?
questions? We've got about another minute left here.
Thank you.
I had a question for you.
Sure.
Okay, Mercury. In the Mercury, we used 1 astronaut. In Gemini, we used 2. Apollo, we used 3. How many do we need to use for Mars?
Well, for the flyby, the proposals have been like two astronauts. I think you're standing in front of a camera there. But for landing, a human landing on Mars, I suspect you would want 6, 8, 10, 12 people. The more the merrier.
Okay, with no further questions, let's give a
Well,
big
thank you all
thank
very
you to
much.
Art Harman.